Today we will learn and reflect on the 8th commandment. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor, also stated as, do not slander. Having an unforgiving heart leads to slander, as St. John Climacus notes. Slander is born of hatred and remembrance of wrongs. Many people think that this commandment only prohibits us from lying, but that's a shallow understanding of the commandment. Actually, the 10 Commandments urge us not to bear false witness against our neighbor. Not only are we forbidden to slander our neighbor, we are urged to guard his reputation. We slander our neighbor even when we tell the truth in a hurtful manner. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. In the ladder of divine ascent, the rung we climb where we struggle against slander precedes the rung where we struggle against lying. When we look at the rungs of the ladder that precede the vices of slander and lying, we notice that we first must be repentant and abandon our remembrance of wrongs that lead to forgiveness. St. John Climacus teaches us. In step 9, remembrance of wrongs is the consummation of anger, the keeper of sins, hatred of righteousness, ruin of virtue, poison of the soul, worm of the mind, shame of prayer, cessation of supplication, estrangement of love, a nail stuck in the soul, pleasureless feeling cherished in the sweetness of bitterness, continuous sin, unsleeping transgressions, and hourly malice. Having an unforgiving heart leads us to slander, as St. John Climacus notes. And step 10, no sensible person will dispute that slander is born of hatred and remembrance of wrongs. Also, slander is an offspring of hatred, a subtle yet coarse disease, a leech lurking unfelt, wasting and draining the blood of love. Continuing with perhaps an imperfect translation, slander is a simulation of love, the patron of a heavy and unclean heart, the ruin of chastity. We will also be quoting from the commentaries from Father John Mack and Father Vassilios. Their comments reflect their experience of priests hearing confessions. Father John Mack translates this differently. Condemning hypocrisy, slander puts on the appearance of love and is the ambassador of an unholy and unclean heart. Father Mack teaches us that putting others down behind their backs can be a way that we can build ourselves up. It can make us look good, as more pious, as more intelligent, so we can point out the bad in someone else. Slander often puts us in the good graces of others when we join them in their slander. Lying is a bad habit, and St. John Climacus urges us not to lie 2 rungs hence. But we must first learn how we should not slander our neighbor. A good grape picker who eats the ripe grapes will not start gathering unripe ones. A charitable and sensible mind takes careful note of whatever virtues it sees in anyone, but a fool looks for faults and defects. Then St. John Climacus perhaps takes aims at me and hits me over the head with his 2x4. I have heard people slandering, and I have rebuked them. And these doers of evil replied in self-defense that they were doing so out of loving care for the person whom they were slandering. Now, I've said much the same thing in other videos when I said this might be okay, but St. John Climacus says to me, stop that kind of love, otherwise you will be condemning as a liar him who said in the Psalms, he talked against his neighbor, him did I drive away. So the message here is to examine your motives, the motives in your inner heart. Are your motives pure, or are your motives selfish? Be careful. There's always a spiritual danger when you speak unkindly things of another, even when they're true, even when you think you do it out of love. Perhaps you're talking about your children with your spouse, because maybe you're trying to fool yourself of your good intentions. Father Vassilios observes that when we see someone sinning and think we have seen the whole person, when in fact we have caught only a glimpse of him at his worst or at his weakest, we do not know whether that person has then shed tears in prayer and begged God for forgiveness. Unfortunately, we are keen to see people's visible iniquities, but we are not so quick to consider their unseen repentance. As St. John Climacus asks all of us, how can we see our own vices accurately? How can we know whether we see through the veil of self-love? As St. John Climacus teaches us, to judge others is a shameless arrogation of the divine prerogative. To condemn is the ruin of one's soul. We are truly fools when we try to judge others. When we judge and slander others, we want those who hear us to agree with us in reveling in the faults and imperfections of those whom we both know. But in so doing, we sow poison in the air. When we judge and slander, we are really destroying our own reputation, for few people enjoy listening to people tear others down. Often, when we judge and slander emphatically to anyone who will listen, we are really revealing what our own true faults are, probably because we see our faults in those in whom we judge. So when we condemn others, we are really ruining our own reputation. When we gaslight, we ruin our own soul and the hatefulness of our heart. As St. John Climacus warns us, quoting from Jesus in Matthew 7, "If it is true, and it really is true, that with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged, then whatever sins we blame our neighbor for, whether bodily or spiritually, we shall fall into them ourselves. That is certain." To summarize, Christians do not gaslight. Just as we learned in the same sermon that Jesus warns us that if we forgive others, our Father in heaven will forgive us, and if we do not forgive others, our Father in heaven will not forgive us. Now we learn that we will be judged in the same manner that we judge others. Judging is what we do in our hearts, and slander is what we do when we speak to others of our judgment. So, as we should be perfect in our forgiving, not cherry-picking whom we will forgive and who is not worthy of our forgiveness, so we should not cherry-pick those whom we will judge and those whom we will not judge. We should strive for perfection in seeing the good and not the bad in others. Although John Climacus often talks of how the brothers should obey the abbot of the monastery, he does not say the brothers should correct each other, rather that they should be patient with each other's faults. St. John Climacus teaches us that we should not tolerate slander and harmful gossip. Do not regard the feelings of a person who speaks to you about his neighbor disparagingly, but rather say to him, "Stop, brother. I fall into greater sins every day. How can I criticize him?" So you slander when you listen to slander. You do not think the best of your neighbor, and this affects your relationship with him and with God. And for emphasis, we are told not to judge. In this way you will achieve two things. You will heal yourself and your neighbor with one plaster. This is one of the shortest ways to the forgiveness of sins. I mean not to judge, as scriptures exhort us. Judge not, as ye shall not be judged. For many years I've been facilitating divorce support sessions. We can learn from the moral dilemmas faced in these tragic situations, such as, when someone is contemplating in their heart divorcing their spouse, what do? They complain about their spouse to their friends and family and coworkers and anyone else who will listen. So who pushes back? Who agrees? Who points out what is good in the absent spouse? Who realizes what is really going on, that they are trying to find confirmation for doing what they know in their heart they should not do? How quick we are to judge, how quick we are to slander. St. John Climacus has advice for those who wish to conquer this horrible habit. He who wants to overcome the spirit of slander should not ascribe the blame to the person who fails, but to the demon who suggests it. For no one really wants to sin against God, even though we all sin without being forced to do so. Our modern world accuses us of being superstitious and believing in demons, although they certainly exist. But perhaps more than the ancients know, we realize how we are prisoners of our past, as St. John Climacus teaches us. The demons, murderers as they are, push us into sin, or if they fail to do this, they get us to pass judgment on those who are sinning, so that they may defile us with the stain which we ourselves are condemning in another. And the chapter on talkativeness and silence is rather terse. St. John Climacus begins by teaching us on step 11. He who has come to love stillness shuts his mouth, but he who delights in wandering about outside is driven out of his cell by his passion. How can we apply this advice to our life in the secular world? Our saint would be counseling us to concentrate on doing our own job, living our own godly life, before we worry about how everyone else is doing their job, judging the imperfections of our neighbor. Father John Mack asks, how often do we ask ourselves, should I be talking now? Is there a reason for talking? Can anything good come from what I have to say? These are also great questions to ask before posting comments on the internet, keeping in mind that real people with real feelings read what you post. And Pope Francis, in his encyclical on the call to holiness in today's world, also discusses the necessity of being careful of what we post to the internet so it can be beneficial rather than harmful to our neighbor. St. John Climacus contrasts talkativeness with contemplative silence. What does he say about talkativeness? Talkativeness is a sign of ignorance, a door to slander, an inducement to jesting, a servant of falsehood, the ruin of compunction, a creator and summoner of despondency, a precursor of sleep, the dissipation of recollection, the abolition of watchfulness, the cooling of ardor, the darkening of prayer. Contrast this with intelligent silence as described by St. John Climacus. Intelligent silence is the mother of prayer, a recall from captivity, preservation of fire, and an overseer of thoughts, a watch against enemies, a prison of mourning, a friend of tears, effective remembrance of death, a depictor of punishment, a delver into judgment, a minister of sorrow, an enemy of freedom of speech, a companion of stillness, an opponent of desire to teach, increase of knowledge, a creator of divine vision, unseen progress, and secret ascent. Now in the Gospels, Peter, having said a word, and here St. John Climacus refers to how eagerly Peter assured Jesus that he would never betray him, though betray him he did, not once, not twice, but thrice as the cock crowed on the night of the crucifixion of Christ. St. John Climacus says St. Peter forgot these words of the psalmist, "I will take heed to my ways lest I sin with my tongue," and from Ecclesiasticus, "A fall from a height to the ground is better than a slip with the tongue." So, though we should pray more and talk less, often we talk more and pray less. We jest when we say of people who talk non-stop that they just love to listen to themselves talk. Just as we are prisoners of our past, so we are held captive to our emotions if we do not think and ponder before we talk. Now, the Oscar ceremonies at the 94th Academy recently, when we were working on this video, provided an excellent object lesson on the spiritual dangers of slander and lying, and how often these are preceded by joking. And in step 12 on lying, in the first sentence, St. John Climacus teaches us, "The offspring of flint and steel is fire, and the offspring of chatter and joking is lying." Now, we're not justifying Will Smith's decision to slap Chris Rock when his joke offended Jada Smith, Will Smith's wife. And we also concur with those who feel that this act of violence, which could have led to a criminal assault charge, is a greater offense than Chris Rock's joke. But this incident does illustrate the spiritual dangers of joking, especially jokes that belittle our neighbor, especially jokes about our neighbor's race, gender, weight, or ailments, all of which are either impossible or very difficult to change. We know that monastic manuals, such as the Ladder of Divine Ascent, lay down strict rules that can be tempered by laymen, but everyone should be very cautious about what jokes they tell, especially jokes that laugh at our neighbor. Perhaps Christians should also be reluctant to become comedians. You ascend the Ladder of Divine Ascent by breaking bad habits and creating new habits. But once we break the bad habit of talkativeness, we can also break the bad habit of lying. And St. John Climacus teaches us that there's a great spiritual danger in lying for any reason, even when we twist the truth to avoid hurting our neighbor, or even to save his reputation, as he warns us in step 12. The inventor of lies makes out that he's an imitator of Rahab, and says that by his own destruction he is affecting the salvation of others. But then he responds, "When we are completely cleansed of lying, then we can resort to it, but only with fear and as occasion demands." When can we resort to lying? Examples include the midwives who refused the orders of Pharaoh to kill the Hebrew newborn sons, lying to say the Hebrew women were healthy and were quick and delivered before they could arrive. Another example is when Schindler lied constantly to the Nazis to save as many Jews as he could in his factories, while manufacturing only duds for ammunition. We reflected on both of these stories in our video on Dr. Laura on Do Not Slander. John Climacus teaches us, "I have seen some who, priding themselves in their skill in lying, and exciting laughter by their jests and twaddle, have pitiably destroyed in their hearts the habit of mourning. Pity that liar who lies so much that he starts to believe in his own lies, and that nothing he says is ever the complete truth." So much of what St. John Climacus teaches us needs no comment, such as, there is one judgment for him who lies through fear of punishment, and another for him who lies when no danger is at hand. A lie is the destruction of love, and a false oath is a denial of God. A babe knows nothing of lying, neither does a soul that is stripped of guile. Father Vassilios tells us a story about a man who loved to gossip, but when he learned he had ruined a man's reputation irreparably, he confessed to his rabbi and asked how he could make amends. And the rabbi asked, "Do you have any feather pillows?" "Well," the man replied, "I have many." "Take one," said the rabbi, "cut it open, and throw the feathers out the window, and then come and see me tomorrow." The next day, the man went to see the rabbi again and said, "Rabbi, I did as you asked. What do you want me to do now?" The rabbi replied, "Go and find every single one of those feathers and put them back in the bellow." In disbelief, the man replied, "But those feathers are long gone. That's impossible. You know that." "Indeed, I know that. said the rabbi, and that is how it is with words when we gossip. And we will conclude with what Father Vassilios teaches us. The purer our hearts, the purer our speech. The more considerate and thoughtful and recollected we are through a life of prayer and contemplation, the less harm our words will cause. Thus, only the pure in heart are able to purify the tongue and use it as a tool for good, without leading us time and time again into a whole host of troubles. Now we'll discuss the sources we use for this video. Both of these editions of the Ladder of Divine Ascent use the same translation, but each has its own thoughtful introductions. We find this work as easy to read as the works of the Stoic philosophers that influenced Christianity and the monastic tradition. But we also have the excellent commentaries by Father John Mack and Father Vassilios, which are valuable because they reflect their experience as priests hearing confessions. And many pictures of icons in this video were from the St. Demetrios Greek Orthodox Church in Fort Lauderdale. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.